He married only to make the woman who left him jealous. But his new wife, a virgin and mysterious, slowly began to disarm him. And now he no longer knows how to control what he feels for her. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. We continue. Adrian Montgomery learned early in life that power isn't won through money alone, but through information. At 37, he commanded the largest private security conglomerate in America, headquartered in Chicago, with tentacles extending throughout North America. His companies protected everyone from influential politicians to major multinational corporations. Cameras, monitoring systems, discreet investigations, everything passed through Adrian's hands. He knew secrets that could topple governments and had access to information that few mortals could ever dream of possessing. His penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast offered a panoramic view of the city he protected and at the same time controlled. Each window was bulletproof, each entrance monitored. Each person who approached him underwent thorough vetting. Adrian had transformed his life into an impenetrable fortress, but not all threats came from outside. Helen Vanderbilt had been his fiancée for 2 years, daughter of a traditional Chicago family, graduated in international relations from the University of Chicago, with postgraduate studies in Paris. She seemed the perfect companion for a man of his position. Intelligent, elegant, connected in the right social circles, but Helen had one peculiarity that deeply bothered Adrian. She saw him with devastating clarity. "You don't love me, Adrian," she had said during their last conversation 3 months, Fargo sitting on the black Italian leather sofa in his office. "You love the idea of possessing me, of having me as another trophy in your collection. But truly giving yourself? You've never done that with anyone." Helen's words still echoed in his mind like a wound that refused to heal. She had returned the engagement ring, a 5-carat Colombian emerald that had cost more than many Americans would earn in an entire lifetime, and walked out of his life without looking back. Adrian tried to convince himself that he felt only relief. One fewer person to protect, one less vulnerability to manage. But then came the news that made him lose control for the first time in years. Helen was engaged to Robert Carter, a career American diplomat known for his eloquence and natural charm, the man who had everything Adrian despised: spontaneous popularity, genuine charisma, and the ability to win people over without needing cameras or dossiers. The photo of the two in the New York Times showed Helen radiant, with a smile Adrian had never been able to evoke from her. The jealousy that overtook him was something primitive, visceral. It wasn't just the wounded pride of a powerful man rejected. It was something far more dangerous, the discovery that, beneath all his defenses, there still existed a heart capable of bleeding. And a bleeding heart, Adrian knew well, was synonymous with weakness, and weakness needed to be eliminated. The revenge he planned was surgical, calculated to cause the maximum emotional impact possible. If Helen had rejected him for being unable to give himself, he would prove he could marry any woman at any moment. Not for love, that would be admitting she was right, but as a pure demonstration of power. He would find someone who was everything Helen was not: young, inexperienced, financially dependent, someone who needed him, not someone who challenged him. That's when Claire entered his life like a dark gift from fate. The International Literary Event in Chicago happened annually at the Chicago Cultural Center, bringing together writers, translators, and academics from around the world. Adrian didn't usually frequent this type of occasion, but his contacts in diplomatic circles had invited him. Helen would be there with her new fiancé, and he wanted to be present to show that he had moved on. Claire Wright was sitting alone at a table in the Cultural Center's cafe, translating an old German manuscript. Adrian observed her for almost an hour before approaching. There was something about her that completely contrasted with the sophisticated environment around her. She wore a simple navy blue dress that seemed to have seen better days. Her brown hair was tied in a discreet bun, and she wore no jewelry except for a small golden crucifix around her neck. But it was her eyes that hypnotized Adrian. Green as a forest, they carried a depth that seemed to hold ancient secrets. When she finally looked up and found him watching her, She didn't avert her gaze as most women did. She held his look with a serenity that bordered on defiance. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, with English carrying a foreign accent. "Excuse the indiscretion," Adrian responded, approaching her table. "I'm Adrian Montgomery. I couldn't help but notice you're working with German manuscripts. It's an area that has always fascinated me." A lie. Adrian couldn't even order coffee in German, but he knew how to steer a conversation where he wanted it to go. Claire studied him for a few seconds before responding. "Claire Wright, and you lied about the German manuscripts, didn't you?" Her frankness momentarily disarmed him. "How do you know?" "Your eyes," she answered simply. "They don't show genuine recognition when they look at these pages. They show curiosity about me, not about my work." Adrian smiled. It had been a long time since someone had surprised him like this. "You're right. I don't know anything about German manuscripts, but I would like to know about you." Claire had arrived in Chicago 3 days earlier, invited by the German Cultural Foundation to participate in the event as a specialist translator of medieval literature. She came from a small town in Minnesota, where she lived in a kind of lay convent run by German nuns who took in orphans and vulnerable people. Her story was a silent tragedy that Adrian would discover only later, through his meticulous investigations. Claire had lost her mother at 8, victim of an aggressive cancer that the family couldn't adequately treat. Her father, a small businessman in imports, had mysteriously gone bankrupt a few months later, losing everything to creditors who appeared, like ghosts in the dead of night. With nowhere to go, Claire and her younger sister, Amy, had been taken in by the nuns at Mercy Convent. While Amy grew up with health problems that required constant care and expensive medications, Claire devoted herself to studies with a determination that impressed the religious women. She learned German, Latin, French, and English. She specialized in translating ancient texts, particularly religious and literary manuscripts. At 24, she had become one of the most respected translators of classical German in the country, although few knew her name. "I've lived at the convent for 16 years, she told Adrian in that first conversation. "Without embarrassment or self-pity, I take care of my sister, work with translations, and help maintain the library. It's a simple life, but it has purpose." Adrian was fascinated by the way she spoke about her life. There was no resentment in her voice, nor that victim tone he so despised in people who had experienced hardship. Claire had simply accepted her fate and built something meaningful within the limitations life had imposed on her. "And you never wanted to leave, see the world, have a family of your own?" he asked, genuinely curious. "I already see the world through the books I translate," she responded, pointing to the manuscript in front of her. "This one is a treatise on alchemy from the 16th century. Yesterday I finished a collection of love letters between a German nobleman and a French peasant girl. The day before they were mystical poems by Meister Eckhart. I don't need to travel physically to know the human soul." But there was something more in her eyes, something her words didn't reveal. A subtle melancholy, a contained yearning. Adrian, an expert at reading people, immediately noticed that Claire was hiding an important part of herself. During the next 3 days of the event, he observed her from a distance. He noticed how she ate little at the dinners offered by the organization, how she saved every dollar, how she politely declined invitations for tourist outings around the city. He also noticed how other men tried to approach her and how she maintained a polite but impenetrable barrier. It was on the last day of the event that Adrian discovered the vulnerability he was looking for. Claire received a call that left her visibly shaken. Adrian, who had asked his men to discreetly monitor her communications, a professional habit he applied to anyone who sparked his interest, immediately knew what it was about. Amy, her sister, had been rushed to the hospital. The convent didn't have the resources to pay for a specialized treatment that could save her life. That night, Adrian found Claire sitting alone in the bar of the hotel where she was staying. It wasn't an expensive place. She had clearly chosen the most economical option available. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She just stared fixedly at a cup of coffee that was cooling in her hands. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded. without taking her eyes off the cup. "I heard about your sister," said Adrian, deciding to be direct. "I'm very sorry." Claire finally looked at him. "How did you know?" "I have my ways. It's part of my job to know things about people who interest me, and I interest you." The question came out more direct than she had intended. "More than you should," Adrian responded with surprising honesty. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The bar was almost empty, just a few solitary guests at other tables, each immersed in their own silent dramas. "How much would your sister's treatment cost?" Adrian asked. $200,000, Claire responded without hesitation. "It might seem like little to someone like you, but for me it represents a fortune I could never gather." "And if I offered that money?" Claire stared at him with suspicion. "In exchange for what?" Adrian took a deep breath. This was the decisive moment. In exchange for a marriage. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire studied him as if trying to decipher a particularly complex foreign language. "A marriage," she repeated slowly. "A matrimonial contract for 2 years. You would be my legal wife, live in my house, participate in social events when necessary. In exchange, I would pay for your sister's treatment, guarantee the financial support of the convent for the next 10 years, and at the end of the period, you would receive an amount sufficient to restart your life wherever you wanted. And what would you gain from this?" she asked with a coldness that impressed Adrian. "Social convenience, stability, a discreet wife who won't question my working methods or interfere in my business." It was an edited version of the truth. Adrian couldn't admit, even to himself, that there was something deeper and more dangerous motivating that proposal. Claire remained silent for long minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was firm. "I need guarantees, legal contracts that protect both you and me, and I need to know exactly what you expect from me as a wife. Company at social events, absolute discretion about my private and professional life, nothing beyond that." "Nothing beyond that," she repeated, and there was something in her tone that made Adrian realize she knew exactly what he wasn't talking about. "Nothing beyond that," he confirmed, lying to them both. Claire extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Adrian Montgomery." When Simone, he touched her hand to seal the pact. An electric current ran through his body. At that moment, Adrian knew he had just made the most dangerous negotiation of his life. The marriage took place on a cold July morning at the registry office in Wicker Park, without flowers, without guests, without ceremony. Just Claire, Adrian, 2 witnesses he had hired, and a civil registry official who seemed bored with the bureaucratic formality of yet another civil union. Claire wore the same navy blue dress from the day they met. Adrian was impeccable in a charcoal grey suit that cost more than most people spent on a car. When the official asked if they took each other as husband and wife, their voices sounded mechanical, devoid of the emotion that normally accompanies this moment. But when Adrian slid the ring onto Claire's finger, a simple white gold band that he had personally chosen, there was an involuntary intimacy in the gesture that made both avoid looking each other in the eyes. The contracts had been signed 3 days earlier in Adrian's law office. 15 pages of detailed clauses that specified every aspect of that marriage of convenience. Claire read each line with the attention of someone who knew her life depended on those words. Adrian observed her in silence, impressed by the practical intelligence she demonstrated when negotiating some points and suggesting modifications that protected them both. What the documents couldn't predict was the tension that settled between them from the moment Claire crossed the threshold of Adrian's mansion in Highland Park. The house was a modern palace of glass and concrete, nestled among the lush vegetation of Lake Forest. Entire walls of glass offered views of the city below, but the architectural design created a strange sensation of exposure and enclosure at the same time. "Your room is on the 2nd floor, Adrian said, leading her through the silent corridors. "It has a view of the garden and direct access to the terrace. You can redecorate however you want." The room was larger than all the space Claire had occupied in the convent for 16 years. Her king-size bed dominated the environment, surrounded by designer furniture whose names she couldn't even pronounce. But what most caught her attention were the huge floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of the forest. "It's beautiful," she said, and for the first time since they met, her voice carried genuine emotion. "I'm glad you like it," Adrian responded, and something in his tone made Claire turn to look at him. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Claire noticed there was something different in his eyes when he observed her in that environment, as if she belonged there in a way that neither she nor he could completely understand. Adrian, in turn, was surprised by the force of desire he felt when imagining Claire in that room, in that bed, waiting for him. "My room is on the floor below," he said quickly, breaking the moment. "We have separate rooms, as agreed." "Of course," Claire murmured, but there was a note of disappointment in her voice that she hadn't expected to feel. The first days were a careful dance of approach and distance. Claire explored the house during the day while Adrian worked. The mansion seemed like an inhabited museum. Each piece of art, each piece of furniture, each decorative object had been chosen by professionals to create an impressive but personality-devoid environment. It was the house of a man who had learned to live without revealing anything about himself. But Claire began to notice details that revealed more than Adrian would like to admit. His office, which she had only seen for a few seconds, had an entire wall covered with monitors, showing security images from various points of the house. The refrigerator was always full of the most expensive food available, but Adrian ate little, and mechanically, as if food were just fuel. He received dozens of calls a day, but Claire never heard him laugh during any conversation. Dinners were the strangest moments. Adrian had insisted they eat together whenever he was home, to maintain the appearance of a normal couple, as he said. They sat at opposite ends of a dining table for 10, served by a silent employee who appeared and disappeared like a discreet ghost. "How was your day?" he invariably asked. "Quiet. I read, walked in the garden, helped Martha in the kitchen even. Though she insisted I didn't need to," Claire would respond, trying to create some normality in those artificial rituals. "And your day?" She would return the question. "Meetings, conferences." "The usual problems," he would respond vaguely. But Claire noticed that Adrian observed her constantly. Not obviously, but she felt the weight of his gaze when he thought she wasn't paying attention. It was an intense analytical look, as if he were trying to decipher her or memorize every detail of her presence in that space. What Claire didn't know was that Adrian was waging an internal battle that threatened to destroy the control he had cultivated throughout his adult life. Each of her gestures, each discreet smile, each time she distractedly touched the golden crucifix on her neck, awakened in him a dangerous mixture of desire and tenderness that he didn't know how to manage. At night, alone in his room, Adrian would hear her footsteps on the floor above, and imagine what it would be like to climb those stairs, enter her room, and admit that their marriage had ceased to be a simple contract since the first day. But admitting this would be admitting weakness, and weakness wasn't part of the emotional vocabulary he had learned to use to survive. It was on a Thursday night, 3 weeks after the wedding, that everything began to change. Claire came down to get a glass of water in the kitchen and found Adrian sitting alone on the terrace, looking at the illuminated city below. He wore only a t-shirt and jeans, without the armor of formality that normally protected him. There was something vulnerable in his posture that made Claire hesitate at the door. "Sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to disturb you." "You're not disturbing me," he responded without turning around. "Having trouble sleeping?" "Sometimes," she admitted, approaching hesitantly. "I'm still getting used to the silence. At the convent there was always some noise, the sisters praying, Amy talking in her sleep, the wind in the old trees. And here it's too silent," he understood. "Here it's silent in a different way. It's the silence of someone who has chosen to be alone." The observation was so precise that Adrian finally turned to look at her. Claire was barefoot, wearing a simple white cotton nightgown that the moonlight made almost translucent. Her hair fell loose on her shoulders, and she looked younger, more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. "And you understand this type of silence?" he asked. "I understand," she responded simply, sitting in the chair next to him. I chose it. 2 for a long time. They sat in silence for a few minutes, observing the city lights. There was an intimacy in that moment that no contract had anticipated, a connection that couldn't be bought or negotiated. "Claire," Adrian finally said, his voice lower than usual. "Yes?" "This marriage is becoming more complicated than I expected." Claire looked at him and for the first time since they met, saw something like uncertainty in his eyes. "Complicated how?" she asked, although she already knew the answer. Adrian didn't answer Claire's question that night, but something fundamental had changed between them. In the days that followed, he began to appear more at home, inventing meetings he could do, by video conference, cancelling trips he would previously have considered indispensable. Claire noticed the change but pretended not to, maintaining the same quiet routine she had established. It was during one of these afternoons that Claire discovered something that would change her perception of the man she had married. Exploring. Adrian's immense library, a 2-story room with thousands of books that seemed never to have been opened, she found an entire section dedicated to classical German literature. Not just translations in English, but original editions in German, some of them rare and valuable. Goethe, Schiller, Heine, Mann, authors she knew intimately through her translation work. Even more intriguing was the fact that many of these books showed clear signs of having been read. Pages with folded corners, underlined passages, notes in the margins in handwriting she recognized as Adrian's. That night, during their ritualistic dinner, Claire couldn't contain her curiosity. "You read German," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Adrian stopped with the fork halfway to his mouth. "Why do you say that?" "Your library. You have first editions of Faust that cost a fortune, and they've been read several times, judging by the annotations." For a moment, Adrian looked like a man caught in an embarrassing lie. "I learned German in college. It's a useful skill in business." "And you read Novalis for business?" Claire asked, referring to the German romantic poet whose verses she had translated countless times. "Are the hymns to night very useful for private security contracts?" Adrian put the fork on his plate and stared at her. There was something between irritation and admiration in his gaze. "You're very observant for your own good," he finally said. "It's part of my profession. Translating isn't just converting words from one language to another. It's understanding the soul of what's being said, the layers of meaning that the author hid between the lines." "And what do you think is hidden between the lines of my library?" Claire hesitated, realizing she had entered dangerous territory, but there was something in his look that encouraged her to continue. "Loneliness," she said simply. "Someone who sought in the words of others what he couldn't find in his own life, and melancholy. A lot of melancholy." The silence that followed was charged with a tension different from all others. Adrian studied her as if she were a puzzle he urgently needed to decipher. "You read me as if I were one of your ancient manuscripts," he finally said. "Perhaps because you hide behind layers like a medieval palimpsest," Claire responded. "Texts written over other texts, truths buried, for convenience. And if I don't want to be read, then you shouldn't have married a translator." The smile that Adrian sketched was the first genuinely spontaneous one that Claire had seen since they met. It completely transformed his face, revealing a more human beauty behind the calculated perfection he normally displayed. It was at this moment that Martha, the employee who took care of the house, entered discreetly into the dining room. "Mr. Montgomery, excuse the interruption. There's a gentleman at the gate who insists on speaking with the lady," she said, addressing Claire. Adrian immediately tensed. "Who?" "He said he's Father Michael from Mercy Convent. Says it's urgent." Claire turned pale. "Father Michael would never leave Minnesota without a very serious reason." "Send him up immediately," Adrian ordered, already rising from the table. 5 minutes later, Father Michael entered the mansion's living room. He was a 60-year-old man, thin and tall, with graying hair and kind eyes that Claire had known since childhood. But at that moment, he seemed burdened with a concern that made her heart race. "Claire, my child," he said, embracing her with the paternal affection he had always shown, I need to talk to you about Amy. Has she gotten worse? Claire asked, feeling her legs weaken. No, on the contrary. The treatment is working better than the doctors expected. She's responding exceptionally well. Claire felt immense relief, but realized there was something more. Then why are you here? Father Michael cast a discreet look at Adrian, who remained standing by the fireplace, observing the scene with total attention. May I speak with your wife in private? The priest asked. Anything you have to say to Claire you can say in my presence, Adrian responded, in a tone that didn't admit contestation. The priest hesitated, but Claire made a gesture that it was all right. Amy found some things among your belongings that remained stored in the convent, things from the time when you arrived there, still children. Claire felt her blood freeze. What kind of things? Letters, documents, a box that belonged to your father. The priest took from his bag a small wooden box that Claire immediately recognized. It was where her father kept the family's important documents before everything collapsed. Amy thought. You should see this personally, Father Michael continued. Especially because of the letters. What letters? Adrian asked, and there was something in his voice that made Claire look at him strangely. Love letters, the priest answered, from a young man who wrote to Claire when she was 17. Letters she never answered. Claire felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. There was only one person who had written her love letters at 17, only one person whose sudden and inexplicable disappearance had marked her life forever. The letters are signed by Edward Sullivan, Father Michael said, observing Claire's reaction, but it was Adrian who had the strongest reaction. His face went livid, and he grabbed the edge of the fireplace as if he needed physical support. Claire looked at him, confused by his reaction, and it was then that she saw something in his eyes that made her understand there was much more to this story than any of them imagined. Adrian, she said slowly, do you know Edward Sullivan? The silence that followed was deafening. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was unrecognizable. Edward Sullivan, he said, was my partner, and he died 5 years ago in an accident that I could have prevented. Claire felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. The world around her began to spin, and she needed to sit down to avoid fainting. That's impossible, she murmured. Edward disappeared when I was 17. That was 7 years ago. He didn't disappear, Adrian said, his voice laden with a guilt he had never expressed. He ran away. Because I discovered he was embezzling money from the company and threatened to report him to the police. The pieces of a macabre puzzle began to form in Claire's mind. Edward had fled because of Adrian. He had changed his identity, rebuilt his life, and years later had become a partner of the man who had forced him to disappear from her life, and now she was married to that same man. Claire, Adrian said, taking a step toward her, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know you knew each other. But Claire was already standing up, the wooden box clutched to her chest. I need to be alone, she said, her voice trembling. I need to read these letters and understand what really happened. She left the room, leaving Adrian and Father Michael in a silence charged with tension. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Claire felt that her life had just taken a direction she could never have predicted. And downstairs, Adrian understood that the marriage of convenience had transformed into something much more dangerous, a connection to the past that threatened to destroy everything he had built. Claire locked herself in her room and didn't come out for 3 days. Adrian respected her space, but the tension in the house was palpable. Martha, the employee, would bring up trays of food that returned practically untouched. Father Michael had returned to Minnesota after a long and private conversation with Adrian, the content of which Claire never discovered. During these 3 nights of isolation, Claire read and reread the 27 letters that Edward had sent her 7 years earlier. Each word was a stab of nostalgia and pain. Edward had been her first love, the son of the local pharmacist, 3 years older than her. They had met in the public library where Claire spent afternoons studying German with books donated by local immigrants. The letters revealed an Edward who was in love, a dreamer who talked about plans to study business in Minneapolis and return to get Claire when she turned 18. He wrote about a future that included them both, about how he wanted to take care of her and Amy, about how he was certain they were soulmates destined to be together. The last letter was dated a week before he disappeared. In it, Edward talked about some family problems he needed to resolve, but promised he would soon be back. "I'll wait for you forever," he had written. "And I know you'll wait for me too, even if you never answer my letters. Your silence is more eloquent than 1,000 words of love." Claire cried for hours reading that last letter. She had waited for Edward for years, refusing any approaches from other men, making excuses to herself about why she had chosen a life of celibacy in the convent. The painful truth was that a part of her had always expected him to return. On the 4th morning, she finally came down for breakfast. Adrian was sitting at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room where they normally had their meals, drinking black coffee and reading reports on his tablet. When he saw her, he immediately closed the device and focused on her. "How are you?" he asked, and there was a genuine concern in his voice that Claire hadn't expected to find. "Confused," she answered honestly, serving herself coffee. "Hurt. Trying to understand how fate can be so cruel." "Claire, about Edward," Adrian began, but she interrupted him. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Adrian sighed deeply. "He came to my company 6 years ago using the name Edward Smith. Said he had lost his original documents in a fire and had gotten a second copy with a slightly altered name. It was a plausible story. Happens more than you'd think." "And you believed him?" "At the time, yes. He was competent, intelligent, had innovative ideas for the security sector. In a few months he became my right-hand man." Claire drank her coffee in silence, waiting for him to continue. "Edward was obsessed with you," Adrian said, and there was something strange in his voice. "He talked about a woman he had left in Minnesota, whom he had loved since adolescence. Said he was saving money to go get her, to give her the life she deserved." "He talked about me?" Claire asked, feeling her heart race. "Constantly." "Showed a photo of you, an old photo from when you were still very young. Said you were unofficially engaged, that you were waiting for him in a convent." Claire closed her eyes, feeling a mixture of pain and anger. Edward had kept alive the hope of a future that she didn't even know he still desired. "What happened?" she asked. "I discovered he was embezzling money from the company, not much, but enough to catch my attention. When I confronted him, he confessed. Everything. Said he needed the money to pay his father's debts and to have the means to return to you." Adrian paused, clearly uncomfortable with the next part of the story. "I could have fired him and resolved the matter internally. But at the time I was more rigid, less willing to understand emotional motivations. I threatened to report him to the police." "And then?" Edward panicked, begged for more time, said he would return everything with interest, but I had already made my decision. I gave him 24 hours to return the money or I would file the report." Claire felt a growing anger in her chest, but forced herself to continue listening. "He disappeared that night, took some belongings and vanished. I thought I had done the right thing, an example for other employees who might have similar ideas. But he came back," Claire said, 2 years later, with his real name, clean documents, a completely new story about his life. Said he had inherited some money from a distant uncle and wanted to invest in private security." Adrian stood up and began to pace the kitchen, clearly agitated. "I didn't recognize him immediately. He had changed a lot, lost weight, grown a beard, changed his style. And I see so many people that sometimes faces blur together." "When did you realize who he was?" "A few months after he became my partner. I accidentally found an old photo among his belongings, the same photo of you he used to show me years before. That's when it all made sense." Claire felt as if she were living a nightmare. "And what did you do?" "Nothing," Adrian admitted, with shame. "Edward had become a valuable partner. He was honest in business, competent, reliable, and I realized he had returned not for revenge but for love. He still talked about you, still planned to go get you. So why did he die?" The question came out harsher than Claire intended. Adrian stopped pacing and faced her. "Because I'm a coward," he said simply. "What do you mean?" "Edward wanted to leave the partnership. Said he had saved enough money and would finally go get you. Asked me to buy his part of the company. Claire felt she was about to hear something that would change everything. "I refused," Adrian continued. "Not for financial reasons, but because I had become obsessed with the idea of you. Edward talked about you so much that I felt like I knew you. When he showed your photo, when he described your personality, your intelligence, your strength, I developed an unhealthy fixation." "You knew me before we met in Chicago," Claire said, "and it wasn't a question." "Yes, I knew everything about your life. Where you lived, what you did, your sister's situation. When Edward said he was going to get you, I panicked. I couldn't admit I was in love with a woman I had never seen in person, a woman who loved another man." Claire was trembling. "What did you do?" "I sabotaged his car," Adrian said, his voice breaking. "Not to kill him, just to make him miss the trip he was going to take to Minnesota to get you. But something went wrong. The accident was much worse than I planned." The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked at Adrian as if she were seeing a stranger. "Edward died because of me," she finally said. "Edward died because of my unhealthy obsession with you," Adrian corrected. "An obsession that led me to investigate your life, discover Amy's illness, appear at that literary event knowing you would be there." Claire rose from the table, feeling sick. "You planned our meeting, planned the marriage proposal, used my sister's illness to manipulate me." "Yes," Adrian admitted without trying to defend himself. "And now you're confessing everything because you feel guilty?" "I'm confessing because I've truly fallen in love with you, Claire, and I can't continue living a lie." Claire stared at him with a mixture of horror and fascination. "You're a psychopath," she said. "Maybe, but I'm a psychopath in love with you." The brutal honesty of the confession left Claire speechless. Part of her wanted to run, leave that house and never see Adrian again. But another part, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt strangely attracted to the destructive intensity of his love. "I need to get out of here," she finally said. "To where?" "I don't know. Away from you, away from all this." Adrian nodded. "I'll arrange everything you need, money, documents, protection if necessary." "Why?" she asked. "Because I love you enough to let you go." Claire looked at him one last time before leaving the kitchen. And in that look, Adrian saw something that terrified him more than any death threat. He saw that despite everything, Claire felt something for him too. Claire didn't leave the mansion that day, nor the next. For an entire week, she and Adrian lived like two ghosts in the same house, carefully avoiding each other, speaking only what was necessary through Martha. Adrian respected the distance she demanded, but Claire could constantly feel his presence, as if he were always nearby, watching, waiting. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Claire made a discovery that would change everything. Again. Unable to sleep, she decided to explore the parts of the house she still didn't know. She went down to the basement, an area that Adrian had never mentioned. What she found there left her frozen with horror and fascination. It was a control room worthy of a spy movie. Dozens of monitors covered an entire wall, showing live images of all the rooms in the mansion, the gardens, the entrance gate, and even her own bedroom. Claire saw herself on the screen, standing in the doorway of that dark room, and understood that she had discovered Adrian's most intimate secret. "You shouldn't be here." His voice behind her made her jump with fright. Claire turned and found Adrian standing at the entrance to the room, wearing only jeans and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled as if he also couldn't sleep. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, her voice trembling with anger and something else she didn't want to identify. "Since the first day," he admitted without trying to hide the shame in his voice. "It's a disease, Claire, an obsession I can't control." "You saw me?" she began, blushing at the thought of the intimacies he might have witnessed. "I force myself not to look when you're in private moments," Adrian said quickly, "but I confess that I can't always resist." Claire looked again at the monitors, seeing herself multiplied in different angles, and felt a strange mixture of violation and excitement. There was something disturbingly intimate in the idea that Adrian watched her, studied her every movement, knew her most secret habits. "Why tell me this now?" she asked. "Because I'm tired of lying, and because you deserve to know who the man you married really is." Adrian took a step toward her, and Claire didn't back away. There was an electric tension in the air of that dark room, illuminated only by the monitors. "I'm a sick man, Claire, obsessed, dangerous. You should run from me as far as possible." "And if I don't want to run?" The question left her mouth before she could censor it. Adrian's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" Claire moved closer to him, her heart beating erratically. "I'm saying that maybe I'm sick too. Because despite everything you've done, everything you've told me, I can't stop thinking about you." "Claire." His voice was a warning. "You killed the man I loved," she continued, each word laden with pain and desire. "Manipulated my entire life, brought me to this house like a trophy. Watch me as if I were an object in your collection." "Yes," he admitted, his breathing becoming heavy. "And yet, when you look at me, when you talk to me, when you confess your sins with this brutal honesty, I feel something I never felt for Edward." Now there were only a few inches separating them. Claire could feel the heat of his body, the smell of his skin, the tension radiating from every muscle. "What do you feel?" Adrian asked, his voice husky. "Desire," she whispered. "Anger, fear, and something deeper that scares me." "Claire, if you stay here with me tonight, there's no going back," he warned her. "I'm not a man who knows how to love in a healthy way. And I'm not a woman who knows how to choose healthy men," she responded, placing her hand on his chest. What happened next was an explosion of passion and fury that had accumulated. Adrian kissed her with a desperate intensity, as if trying to possess her completely through that contact. Claire responded with equal fervor, biting his lips, scratching his back, pouring out all the anger and desire she had harbored for weeks. They made love right there, on the cold floor of that surveillance room, surrounded by images of their own intimacies projected on the monitors. It was wild, desperate, charged with a destructive passion that they both knew was dangerous. Afterward, lying on the floor, Claire observed the screens showing different angles of their intertwined bodies. It was disturbing and exciting at the same time. "Now you really possess me," she said, tracing circles on his sweaty chest. "And you possess me too," Adrian responded, completely, dangerously. They went up to his bedroom that night, breaking the last barrier that remained between them. Adrian made love to Claire with a passion that bordered on adoration, as if trying to erase all the sins of the past through the intensity of the present. In the morning, Claire woke in his arms, feeling transformed. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and strangely, she felt free for the first time in years. "No regrets?" Adrian asked, running his fingers through her hair. "Many regrets," she responded honestly. "But not about this. Never about this." In the days that followed, they immersed themselves in an intense and complicated passion. Adrian showed Claire all his obsessions, all his fears, all his darkest desires. And she, in turn, revealed to him parts of herself she had never shown to Edward, the sensual, intense woman, capable of loving with the same destructive passion he offered, but their happiness would be short-lived. One afternoon, while Claire was organizing books in the library, Martha entered the room nervously. "Mrs. Montgomery, there's a man at the gate who wants to speak with you and Mr. Montgomery. Says it's about very important business." "What's his name?" Claire asked distractedly. "Dimitri Costa." Claire had never heard that name, but something in the way Martha pronounced it left her uneasy. When she found Adrian in his office and mentioned the visit, she saw his face turn pale. "Dimitri," he murmured, and there was real fear in his voice. "He shouldn't be in America. Who is he?" "My ex-partner, and one of the most dangerous men I've ever met." Adrian stood up and began to pace around the office, clearly agitated. "Claire, I need you to leave the house, now." "Why? What does this man want?" "Revenge," Adrian answered simply. "And if he's here, it means he discovered our marriage. He'll try to use you against me." But it was too late. Martha appeared again at the door, followed by a tall, elegant man with blonde hair and icy blue eyes. Dimitri Costa had the appearance of a Scandinavian model, but there was something in his smile that made Claire feel a chill down her spine. "Adrian, my old friend," Dimitri said in English, with a slightly German accent, "and this must be the Famous Claire Wright, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. The fact that he knew her maiden name left Claire even more alert. Dimitri, Adrian said, his voice controlled but tense. I wasn't expecting to see you here. I'm sure you weren't. Dimitri smiled, his eyes fixed on Claire. But when I learned that you had married the woman for whom Edward Sullivan died, I simply couldn't resist paying a visit. Claire felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. How do you know about Edward? Dimitri's smile became even more sinister. My dear, I know much more about you two than you imagine, and I've come here for a reckoning that's long overdue. Adrian stepped forward, placing himself between Dimitri and Claire. Leave her out of this. Your problems are with me. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Dimitri responded. Claire is exactly what makes all this interesting. After all, what revenge would be complete without involving the person you love most? At that moment, Claire understood that her life had just taken an even more dangerous turn, and that the man she had fallen in love with brought with him enemies who could destroy them. Dimitri installed himself in the mansion like an uninvited guest who knew exactly how to make his presence impossible to ignore. Adrian had no choice but to accept his stay. Dimitri knew secrets that could destroy not only his business but his freedom. Claire immediately realized there was a complex and dangerous history between the two men, a history that Adrian refused to tell completely. Dimitri was my partner in Europe before I came to America, was all Adrian said when Claire pressed him for details. Our business ended badly, but Claire knew there was much more behind that simplistic explanation. The tension between the two men was palpable, charged with a hostility that went far beyond commercial disagreements. Dimitri, in turn, showed himself to be charming and attentive to Claire, treating her with an exaggerated courtesy that clearly irritated Adrian. During dinners, which returned to happening in the formal dining room, Dimitri dominated the conversations with fascinating stories about travels around the world, international business, and cultural experiences that made Claire feel mundane and inexperienced. You should travel more, Claire, Dimitri said, on one of these occasions, savoring the expensive wine he had brought as a gift. A woman with your intelligence and sensitivity shouldn't be confined to a single perspective of the world. Claire is perfectly happy here, Adrian intervened, his voice laden with tension. Is she really? Dimitri asked, addressing her directly. Happy in a house full of cameras, married to a man who watches her like a prisoner observing the outside world? Claire choked on her wine. How do you know? About the cameras? Dimitri smiled. My dear, I was the one who taught Adrian to use surveillance systems. I recognize his work anywhere. Enough, Adrian said, rising from the table. Claire, let's go to the office. We have matters to discuss. But Dimitri wasn't finished. Adrian, you haven't told her about our business in Europe, about how we got our first clients. Dimitri, about the information we sold, the favors we did, the people who disappeared when they became inconvenient for our powerful clients. Claire looked from Dimitri to Adrian, feeling she was discovering a new layer of her husband's dark personality. What people? People who knew too much, Dimitri responded casually. Investigative journalists, human rights activists, idealistic politicians, people like Edward Sullivan. Edward's name fell into the room like a bomb. Claire stood up abruptly, knocking over her wineglass. Edward didn't know anything about your business, she said, her voice trembling. Oh, but he did, Dimitri corrected. He knew that Adrian wasn't just a security businessman, but a man who sold silence and manufactured disappearances. Edward discovered compromising files and threatened to expose everything. You're lying, Adrian said, but his voice didn't carry conviction. Am I? Dimitri asked, pulling an envelope from his pocket. These are copies of the last messages Edward sent before he died. Messages to a journalist in Minneapolis, reporting his discoveries about your dear husband's illegal activities. Claire snatched the envelope from Dimitri's hands and quickly read the printed messages. They were indeed from Edward, detailing information about questionable operations, mentioning evidence he had collected, talking about the need to expose the truth even if it cost him his life. Edward didn't die because of me, she said slowly, looking at Adrian with a mixture of horror and understanding. He died because he discovered you're a criminal. Claire, let me explain. Explain what? She shouted. That you not only killed the man I loved, but that you killed him to protect your dirty secrets? That our marriage isn't just a farce based on obsession, but a way for you to control the only person who could connect you to Edward's murder. The silence that followed was broken by Dimitri's low laugh. I see she's beginning to understand the kind of man she married. Adrian looked at Claire with genuine despair. You're right about everything except for one thing. I didn't bring you here to control you. I brought you here because I fell in love with you through Edward's eyes. And now I love you more than my own life. Love, Dimitri laughed. Adrian, you don't know how to love. You only know how to possess. And you do, Adrian retorted. You who came here not for justice but out of jealousy, because you can't bear that I found something you'll never have. It was then that Claire realized the true dynamic between the two men. Dimitri wasn't there just for professional revenge. There was something more personal, more intimate. You two were more than partners, she said, not as a question but as a statement. Both men looked at her with surprise. Dimitri is in love with you, Claire continued, addressing Adrian. And you rejected him. That's why the partnership ended badly. Dimitri's face darkened. You don't know what you're talking about. Yes, I do, Claire said, her intuition sharpened by the extreme situation. I've seen how you look at him. I saw the jealousy in your eyes when you realized that Adrian really fell in love with someone. You didn't come here to protect me from Adrian. You came to take me away from him. Claire, leave the room, Adrian ordered, sensing danger in Dimitri's expression. But it was too late. Dimitri pulled out a gun that was hidden in his jacket and pointed it directly at Claire. You're a very perceptive woman, he said, his voice now devoid of all previous courtesy, and very inconvenient. Dimitri. No, Adrian said, taking a step toward him. Your problem is with me. Leave her out of this. My problem is that you chose her instead of me, Dimitri responded. Chose an orphaned country girl instead of the man who built an empire with you, who killed for you, who would have died for you. The confession came laden with a pain that made Claire understand that Dimitri wasn't just a psychopath thirsting for revenge, but a man destroyed by the rejection of the only person he had loved. I never asked you to do those things, Adrian said gently, and you always knew I couldn't return your feelings. But now you can return hers? Dimitri pointed the gun at Claire. What does she have that I never had? She loves me back, Adrian responded simply. The response was like a shot to Dimitri's heart. For a moment, Claire saw all the mask of charm and control crumble, revealing a deeply wounded man. Then you'll die together, Dimitri said, his voice now cold and calculating, like a romantic couple in a Greek tragedy. It was at this moment that Claire made a decision that would change everything. Instead of backing away or begging for mercy, she took a step toward Dimitri. You're right, she said calmly. Adrian doesn't know how to love in a healthy way. He's obsessive, controlling, dangerous. He killed an innocent man out of sick jealousy. Adrian looked at her with shock, not understanding where she was going with this. But do you know what that means? Claire continued, still approaching Dimitri. It means I'm sick too, because I fell in love with exactly that destructive intensity, with that capacity to love so totally that it borders on madness. Dimitri hesitated, clearly confused by the direction of the conversation. You want Adrian for yourself? Claire asked, now only a meter away from the gun. Then kill me, because as long as I'm alive, he'll never look at anyone else. Claire, no, Adrian murmured, finally understanding what she was doing. Do it, she said to Dimitri. But know that it won't be revenge, it will be a favor, because loving Adrian Montgomery is a condemnation that I chose to accept. The declaration was so raw, so honest, that Dimitri slightly lowered the gun, hypnotized by her intensity. And it was in this moment of distraction that Claire moved, not away from the gun, but directly against it, initiating a struggle that would determine the fate of all three. The struggle for the gun lasted only a few seconds, but seemed like an eternity. Claire threw herself against Dimitri with a desperate force he hadn't expected, making him stagger backward. The gun fired, the shot echoing through the mansion like thunder, but the bullet lodged in the ornate plaster ceiling. Adrian reacted immediately, grabbing Dimitri from behind, while Claire tried to wrest the gun from his hands. In the confusion, a second struggle began, more violent than the first. Furniture broke, expensive vases shattered against the walls, and the sound of labored breathing mingled with curses in 3 different languages. It was Adrian who finally managed to disarm Dimitri, but not before taking a punch to the face that made him bleed profusely. Claire, with the gun in her trembling hands, pointed it at Dimitri as he recovered on the floor. "Claire, give me the gun," Adrian said gently, wiping the blood from his nose. "No," she responded, her voice firm despite the tremor throughout her body. "This time I decide." Dimitri laughed, even fallen on the floor with a split lip. "Going to kill me? A nun who never hurt a fly?" "I'm not a nun anymore," Claire responded. "And you just threatened the life of the man I love." "Claire," Adrian began. "Shut up," she said without taking her eyes off Dimitri. "You've already caused enough damage with your decisions. Now it's my turn." Dimitri tried to get up, but Claire tightened her grip on the gun. "Stay where you are. I want to hear the whole truth. About you and Adrian in Europe. About Edward. About why you really came to America." "You won't like what you hear," Dimitri said, but there was a new seriousness in his voice. "I don't like anything I've discovered so far," Claire responded. "Speak." Dimitri leaned against the wall, evaluating his options. Realizing that Claire wasn't bluffing, he began to talk. "Adrian and I built a business based on the manipulation and elimination of inconvenient problems for powerful people, politicians, businessmen, even religious leaders. When someone knew too much or refused to cooperate, we resolved the situation." Claire kept the gun steady, though she felt growing nausea. "Our methods varied. Sometimes it was blackmail, sometimes bribery, and sometimes physical elimination." "How many people?" Claire asked. "Over 5 years, maybe 20, maybe 30. Adrian closed his eyes, clearly suffering with each word. "Edward discovered our files by accident. He was investigating some suspicious financial transactions when he found records of our operations. He was too intelligent for his own good." "And you killed him," Claire said. "I killed him," Dimitri corrected. "Adrian just wanted to scare him, make him back off. But I knew that Edward would never give up. He was too in love with you to let pass anything that could protect you in the future." Claire felt as if she had been shot. "Protect me from what?" "From Adrian," Dimitri responded. "Edward had discovered that Adrian was obsessed with you, had photos of you, detailed information about your life, plans to approach you as soon as he could get rid of the problem that Edward represented." "That's not true," Adrian said, but his voice sounded weak. "No?" Dimitri smiled cruelly. "Then why did you keep that photo of her in the safe along with the company's most important documents? Why did you pay private investigators to track her every movement for years?" Claire looked at Adrian with growing horror. "For years?" "Since Edward first started working with us," Dimitri continued, "Adrian developed a fixation on you through the stories Edward told. When Edward returned with his real name, Adrian's obsession intensified." "And you allowed this?" Claire asked. "I was in love with Adrian," Dimitri admitted. "I thought his obsession with you would pass, that he would realize that I was the one who really understood him, who really loved him." "But it didn't pass," Claire understood. "No, it got worse. Adrian began to plan ways to remove Edward from the equation and approach you. I tried to dissuade him, said it was madness, that you would never accept him. And then you killed Edward to prevent Adrian from doing it," Claire said, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "I killed Edward to save Adrian from himself," Dimitri corrected, "and to punish him for choosing a fantasy instead of the real love I offered." Claire felt sick with the sordid complexity of that deadly triangulation, and yet Adrian came to get me. 2 years later, when he thought he could make it look like coincidence, that he could control the situation. Claire looked at Adrian, who remained silent, unable to deny the accusations. "And you?" she asked Dimitri. "Why did you come to America now?" Because I discovered that you got married. Because I couldn't bear the idea that he had managed to realize his sick fantasy while I continued alone in Europe, taking the blame for crimes. I committed out of love. And what was your plan? Initially, destroy your marriage, show you who Adrian really is, make you leave him and return to the convent. And after that didn't work? Dimitri smiled sadly. Then I realized that you're as sick as he is, that somehow you deserve each other. Claire lowered the gun slightly. Then why try to kill us? Because if I can't have him, no one can. The brutal honesty of the response left everyone in silence for a few moments. You're wrong about one thing, Claire finally said. What? Adrian didn't choose me instead of you because I'm better or because I deserve his love more. Claire looked directly at Adrian as she spoke. He chose me because I accept his darkness, not despite the madness, but because of it. You wanted to change him, save him, make him a better person. She turned to Dimitri again. I love him exactly as he is, dangerous, obsessive, capable of killing for love, and that makes me as dangerous as he is. To prove her point, Claire moved the gun and fired. The shot didn't hit Dimitri but passed so close to his head that he could feel the heat of the bullet. The bullet lodged in the wall behind him, leaving a perfect hole in the Italian wallpaper. Jesus! Christ! Dimitri murmured. Now you're going to leave this house, Claire said, her voice cold as ice. Go back to Europe and never come near us again. Because if you try anything against Adrian, you'll discover that a woman in love with a psychopath can be much more dangerous than the psychopath himself. Dimitri looked from Claire to Adrian, finally realizing that he had lost in every possible way. Jot, you really deserve each other, he said, slowly getting up. Yes, Claire agreed. We deserve each other. Dimitri walked toward the door, stopped and turned one last time. Adrian, you know this won't end well. People like us don't have happy endings. Maybe not, Adrian responded, but I'll have Claire as long as I can. After Dimitri left the mansion, Claire and Adrian remained in silence for long minutes, processing everything that had happened. Would you really have shot him? Adrian finally asked. Yes, Claire responded without hesitation, and I would kill anyone who tried to take you from me. Adrian looked at her with a mixture of admiration and horror. My God, Claire, what have we done to each other? We found each other, she answered simply. We finally found each other. Dimitri's departure should have brought peace, but what followed was a restlessness that threatened to destroy Claire and Adrian from the inside out. In the weeks that passed, they tried to resume their routine, but the atmosphere in the mansion had irrevocably changed. The truths revealed during the confrontation hung between them like ghosts that refused to be exorcised. Claire discovered that living with the complete knowledge of Adrian's crimes was harder than she had imagined. At night, while he slept beside her, she would lie awake imagining how many other people had died because of his decisions. During the day, she would observe his hands, the same hands that touched her with infinite tenderness, and wonder what kind of violence they had committed. Adrian, in turn, was tormented by the discovery that Claire was capable of the same destructive intensity he recognized in himself. The way she had confronted Dimitri, the coldness in her eyes when she fired the gun, the naturalness with which she had assumed the role of his violent protector, all of this fascinated and terrified him at the same time. You're having regrets, Claire said one morning during one of the silent breakfasts that had become their new routine. About what? Adrian asked, although he knew exactly what she was talking about. About having shown me who you really are. About having let me in so deep into your darkness that I can no longer pretend innocence. Adrian put his cup on the table and looked at her directly. And you, are you having regrets? Every day, Claire admitted, but not enough to leave. It was this response that made Adrian make a decision he had been avoiding for weeks. Claire, we need to leave America. Why? Because Dimitri hasn't given up. I know him. He'll be back, and next time it won't be just to talk. Then we kill. Him, Claire said with a simplicity that made Adrian shudder. I don't want you to become that, he said gently. I don't want you to become a murderer because of me. And if I want to? The question hung in the air between them. Adrian realized that Claire had crossed a line from which there might be no return, and that he was responsible for having taken her there. "I don't want you to," he repeated firmly. "You deserve a chance to have a normal life, away from all this madness. With you? If you want." Claire got up from the table and went to the window that overlooked the garden. "Where would we go? I have properties in Florida, remote places where no one would look for us. We could start over. And your business? It can go to hell. You're more important." Claire turned to look at him, surprised by the determination in his voice. "You would really do that? Abandon everything for me?" "Claire, I killed for you before I even met you. Abandoning some business is nothing compared to that." His honesty was both romantic and frightening. Claire realized that Adrian was offering something he had never offered anyone, the chance to start from scratch, free from the weight of his criminal past. "And if I don't want a normal life?" she asked. "If I want to stay by your side, whatever happens?" "Then we'll stay and face the consequences together," Adrian responded. "But I want it to be a conscious choice, not something you accept because you feel trapped with me." Claire came back to him and sat on his lap, interlocking her fingers behind his neck. "Adrian Montgomery," she said, "you are the most dangerous man I've ever met. You're obsessive, controlling, a killer, and completely insane. And I choose to stay, not because I feel trapped, but because I finally found someone who loves me with the same intensity that I'm capable of loving. Even knowing that this might destroy us, especially knowing that." They kissed with the desperate passion of two people who knew they were voluntarily walking toward the abyss, but who preferred free fall to the safety of firm ground. It was that afternoon that everything began to crumble. Claire received a call from the convent. Amy had disappeared. The nuns were desperate. The police had been called, but there were no clues about what might have happened to the young woman. "Dimitri," Adrian said immediately. "He kidnapped her to force us to go to Minnesota." "We have to go," Claire said, already heading to the bedroom to pack. "That's exactly what he wants. It's a trap." "I don't care," Claire shouted the first time she had lost control in front of him. "She's my sister, the only family I have left." Adrian understood there was no possible discussion. Claire would go to Minnesota with or without him, and he wouldn't let her face Dimitri alone. "All right," he said, "but we'll do it my way, with all possible protection and an escape plan already prepared." The flight to Minneapolis was tense. Claire could barely sit still, alternating between moments of panic and moments of cold fury. Adrian made dozens of calls, mobilizing contacts in Minnesota, arranging for weapons and escape routes. "If anything happens to me," he said during the landing, "you have the address of the lawyer in Miami. He has instructions to take care of you and Amy." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Claire responded, "because I won't let it." When they arrived at the convent, a scene of despair awaited them. Mother Superior, a 70-year-old woman whom Claire had known since childhood, was visibly shaken. "Claire, thank God you came," she said, embracing her tightly. "Amy disappeared 3 days ago, simply vanished from her room during the night." Were there signs of struggle? None, as if she had left voluntarily. Adrian and Claire exchanged looks. Dimitri had convinced Amy to go with him, probably lying that Claire was in danger. "Have you received any contact?" Adrian asked. "A call last night. A man with a foreign accent said that Amy was fine, but that you two knew where to find her." "Where?" Claire asked, though she already knew the answer. "At the old Sullivan factory," Mother Superior responded. "The place where Edward's father used to work." Claire felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. Dimitri had chosen the most symbolically cruel location possible, the factory that had belonged to Edward's family, before being destroyed by the operations that led to his death. "It's an obvious trap," Adrian said when they left the convent. "Of course it is," Claire agreed, "but we're going anyway." "Claire." "Adrian, Amy is all I have left from a life before you. If she dies because of your enemies, a part of me will die with her. And you won't want to live with the version of me that remains." The threat wasn't veiled. and Adrian understood that Claire was absolutely serious. At that moment he realized he had created a woman as dangerous as himself, perhaps more dangerous, because she had nothing to lose besides the people she loved. "Then let's go get your sister," he said simply. "And let's finish Dimitri once and for all." As they drove down the rural road toward the abandoned factory, Claire felt a strange peace settle over her. There was something poetic in the idea that everything would end where Edward had begun, his journey, the place that represented both destroyed dreams and the possibility of finally realized revenge. "Are you afraid?" Adrian asked. "No," Claire responded, checking the gun he had given her. "I'm certain." "Certain of what?" "That. No matter what happens tonight, at least we've been honest about who we really are." Adrian smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I love you, Claire Wright. And I love you, Adrian Montgomery, madly, dangerously, completely." When the lights of the abandoned factory appeared on the horizon, both knew they were driving toward a confrontation that would define not only whether they would live or die, but whether the love between them was strong enough to survive the storm they themselves had created. The abandoned Sullivan factory rose against the night sky like a monument to industrial decay. The broken windows looked like empty eyes, and vegetation had begun to reclaim the red brick walls. Claire remembered Edward talking about that place in his letters, how his father used to take him there as a child, before everything collapsed, because of debts and business betrayals that he never fully understood. Adrian parked the car at a safe distance and checked his weapons one last time. "Remember the plan. You enter through the front, I go around and enter through the back," Claire recited. "If something goes wrong, we meet at the escape point you marked on the GPS. And if I don't show up, then I kill Dimitri myself and leave the country with Amy." The coldness with which she said this made Adrian realize he had unleashed a force he might no longer be able to control. But strangely, this didn't frighten him. There was something liberating in knowing that Claire was capable of surviving. Without him, that she had become strong enough to face any storm. "Claire," he said, holding her face between his hands, "no matter what Dimitri says, no matter what lies he tells about me or about the past, all that matters is that I love you more than my own sanity." "And I love you more than my own soul," she responded, sealing the pact with a kiss that tasted of farewell and eternity at the same time. They separated in the darkness, each following their predetermined route. Claire went around the factory to the back, where the forest had almost swallowed the building. She found a broken window on the ground floor and carefully slipped inside. The interior of the factory was a labyrinth of rusted machinery and debris. Claire headed toward what appeared to have been the main office, where there was a faint light. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the gun, but her mind was crystal clear, focused on a simple objective: save Amy and finish with Dimitri. It was then that she heard her sister's voice. "Claire. Claire, is that you?" Amy was tied to a chair in the center of the old office, but she appeared unharmed. Dimitri was sitting casually at a nearby desk, as if waiting for a business meeting. "Punctual as always," he said, when Claire emerged from E. The shadows with the gun pointed at him. "An admirable quality. Release my sister." "Of course. As soon as Adrian arrives, we'll have a civilized conversation, and everyone can leave." "Adrian is already here," she lied. Dimitri smiled. "No, he isn't. He's outside trying to decide whether to enter through the main door or look for another entrance. I know his methods better than you do." As if summoned, Adrian appeared at the office entrance, his gun also in hand. "Dimitri." "Adrian. Good that you both came. Now we can resolve this like civilized people." "What do you want?" Claire asked. "Justice," Dimitri responded simply. "Edward Sullivan died because he discovered the truth about us. Your sister Amy discovered some interesting things too." Claire looked at Amy, confused. "What things?" Amy looked at Claire with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Claire, I didn't know what to do." "What did she discover?" Adrian asked, keeping his gun steady. "That your father didn't go bankrupt due to poor management," Dimitri explained. "He went bankrupt because he was sabotaged by the company that Adrian and I operated at the time, one of our first operations in America." The world seemed to stop around Claire. That's impossible. You weren't in America 17 years ago. Not physically, Dimitri corrected. But we had local agents. Edward's father worked for us, helping to identify vulnerable companies for our European clients to buy for ridiculous prices. Claire felt as if she were living a nightmare. Edward's father sabotaged your family for money. And when Edward discovered this years later, he developed a fixation not just on you, but on destroying the people who had used his father to ruin innocent lives. That's why he came back to work with you, Claire understood. To destroy you from the inside. Exactly. Edward wasn't the naive young man in love that you thought. He was a man seeking revenge who used Adrian as much as Adrian used him. The revelation changed everything. Claire looked at Adrian, seeing in his eyes that he too was processing information that rewrote the entire narrative they had constructed. And, "Now?" Adrian asked. "What do you want us to do with this information?" "I want you to kill each other," Dimitri said casually. "One another, as punishment for all the crimes you've committed, all the lives you've ruined. And if we refuse," Dimitri pointed a gun at Amy, "then I kill her sister in front of you, then kill you both too." The silence that followed was charged with a deadly tension. Claire looked from Adrian to Amy, calculating options that didn't exist. "There's a third alternative," she finally said. "Which is, the three of us leave here alive and you die alone." Before Dimitri could react, Claire shot. Not to kill him, but to wound his hand and make him drop the gun. The shot was accurate, and Dimitri cried out in pain as his gun flew away. Amy took advantage of the moment to free herself from the ropes. She had managed to loosen them during the conversation, and ran behind a rusted machine. What followed was a final confrontation that lasted only minutes, but seemed like hours. Dimitri, even wounded, fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Adrian and Claire worked together as a unit, covering each other, moving with a synchronization that revealed how deeply connected they had become. Imam was Claire who fired the final shot. When Dimitri made one last desperate lunge at Adrian, she didn't hesitate. The man who had destroyed so many lives, who had killed Edward, who had threatened her sister, fell on the dusty factory floor and didn't get up again. Afterward, in the silence that followed the end of the violence, the three stood among the debris of the past, processing what had happened. "Now what?" Amy asked, the first to break the silence. Claire looked at Adrian. "Now we start over, for real this time." 6 months later, in a small coastal town in Florida, Claire opened a translation school that also functioned as a public library. Amy had recovered completely and helped administer the place while studying literature at a local university. Adrian had liquidated all his business in America, donating a significant part of the profits to causes related to the victims of crimes. He had committed. It wasn't redemption. He knew there was no redemption for everything he had done. But it was a start. On an autumn afternoon, Claire was organizing German books in the library when she felt familiar arms embrace her from behind. "How was your day?" Adrian asked, kissing her neck. "Quiet. I helped an elderly lady translate letters that her late husband had sent from Germany during the war." "And you?" "I planted tomatoes," he responded, and there was a genuine simplicity in his voice that still surprised Claire at times. They had become different people, not necessarily better but different. The past still haunted them. Claire still sometimes woke up with nightmares about Edward. Adrian still felt impulses of control and obsession that he had to struggle to contain. But they had learned something fundamental, that true love doesn't erase people's darkness, but teaches how to live with it without letting it consume everything. That night, lying in the simple bed of their simple house, Claire traced old scars on Adrian's chest while he read a book of German poetry. "Do you regret it?" she asked, a question that had become ritual between them. "Killing people? Yes. Ruining lives? Yes. Falling in love with you in a sick and obsessive way? Yes?" "Never," he responded, closing the book and kissing her, "because that's what brought me to you. And if we could go back in time, do everything differently, I would make exactly the same choices." Because all of them led me to this moment, with you in my arms in a life I never imagined I could have. Claire smiled, nestling against him. We are terribly romantic for two such dangerous people. We're dangerous because we're romantic, Adrian corrected, and romantic because we're dangerous. Outside, the sea wind stirred the trees around their small house. Amy had already gone to bed after dining with them and telling stories about her new friends at the university. It was a small life, without glamour, without power, without the excesses that had marked their pasts. But it was a real life, built on brutal truths and impossible love, tempered by the awareness that they had chosen each other not despite their imperfections, but because of them. And for the first time in their lives, both Claire and Adrian understood that sometimes redemption doesn't come through purification, but through acceptance of oneself, of the other, and of the strange beauty that can be born when two broken souls decide to break together instead of alone.